I came into the program with the background in the arts. I'm sort of a writer. I had an undergraduate degree in film, and then I did a digital arts and new media MFA program. So I think one of the reasons they were interested in having me here was because I sort of had this broader background as a creator, rather than sort of a traditional computer science path.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the strengths of this program, actually, that you've got a mixture of people. Very, very essential. So what's your philosophy of making narrative more interactive as a writer? Because writers often feel that nothing is going to be better than the thing that they have written with their thought and their creative instinct and so on. So how do you feel about that?
Right. So, I mean, I've definitely always been a perfectionist. I've been experimenting with interactive stories for, I guess, 7 or 8 years now. And something that's been frustrating is that it's really been hard for me personally to sort of turn over some of my creative process to an algorithm, because it's really hard to find code that you can sort of collaborate with and produce something that seems like a story that I wrote rather than like a CS experiment that I did, right? So the approach that I've been taking in the last couple of years is really thinking about how to sort of break down and atomize the different pieces that go into both sort of creating and presenting a story into little bits and experimenting with how you can move those around. So there's one piece I've done where you literally are moving around little blocks that are representing ways to vary the sentences in a story. So you can like move the block a little bit to change one word, or move it a lot to change the whole meaning of a sentence.
Did you have a name for that project?
That project's called Perfect, and that's you can find that on my website.
And is it perfect?
It's not perfect, but the point of the story is you're trying to sort of make a memory of a perfect day that this character is.
Oh, that's like in the song.
Right.
Yeah, okay, that figures now. And we are moving them around, and the sentences on the right there are changing, and there are different effects on the different sentences, so it depends which sentence we're involved with.
Right, so we can select up here, and this sentence is about the weather, so I think this yellow block changes the temperature, so we can go from, or the weather, I guess, so we can go from like a snowstorm all the way down to, clear blue skies, and then other, bits here are changing how the character feels about that, so you can sort of, based on the story you're trying to make here, you can decide what you want that sort of bit of it to be like.
Okay, that's very interesting. Right, so let's go back to the second project.
The Almost Goodbye?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So that's another project I did recently that was trying to experiment with procedural content generation in narrative. And I sort of thought I would try to approach that from a different angle that I think some people do. Which was, I wanted to try to, rather than build a story generation system from the ground up, try to start with the story that I had hand-authored and think about what the minimum amount of procedural generation was that I could put in there, and have something that was still both recognizably a story that had, what I felt like was a good like beginning, middle, and end, and all those nice narrative-y things, but also was doing something procedurally interesting. So it really is kind of a minimal experiment in that what it's doing is very subtle, but based on the series of conversations with characters that you have as you go through the story, where you're sort of saying goodbye to various people in your life. The system sort of keeps track of like where these scenes are happening and what time of day it is, and what your sort of mood is based on the previous conversations you've gone through. And it uses that information to vary these sort of satellite sentences sprinkled in through the story. So these aren't necessarily the ones narrating major plot events, but they're things talking about like how the character's feeling about what's going on, and little incidentals like if you're in a park you might hear a dog barking or something. And so you're not sort of branching the story on different paths or anything like that, but you're sort of customizing it in a subtle way to the way that you've navigated it as you've gone through.
Can we have a quick look?
Yeah.
Can you bring that up again, do you think?
Yeah.
I like the way that you're able to press a button on the side and actually see some of the variable sentences. It's a bit small scale on the video to see what the sentences actually say, but you can see here that we're selecting different things. The place that you meet people, the person that you're meeting, and over on the right here we can also select our basic affective state, how we feel about it, and then if you look at the green bits in there, so you've pressed the button there, haven't you, to show where the sentences have been varied, where the procedural content is coming in.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see that the bulk of the text is the same, but you've got interesting variations depending on those parameters that you selected.
Right. So like in this example here, we have this sort of beat between these two bits of dialogue, and there's two sentences here that are coming from things like, you know, how the character's feeling, but then also where this scene is taking place based on the character's choices.
Yeah.
So your perception of the scene, theoretically, as you're reading it, is going to be altered a bit based on those.
Yeah, and you were saying as well that the impression or the impact on the person who's going through the story is probably going to be different depending on the order in which they choose to do things, the order of the people they meet, where they choose to meet them, what affective states were available to them when they were doing that. Right,
and that's something that's always really fascinated me, is how much even just like a single word here or there changed can alter someone's perception of a scene. So this is sort of trying to get at that specifically and saying, like, well, maybe you're going to perceive this whole scene about someone saying goodbye to their daughter or whatever differently if it's happening in broad daylight versus at night under a street lamp or whatever. So the body of the story is the same each time, but but your sort of personal perception of it is going to be based on how you've interacted with it before.